Welcome to the CHGO Bulls podcast on this Sunnyside summer Thursday. Visit sunnyside.shop for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases. Enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary. Bright buys every day, only for 21 plus or Illinois Med card holders. I am Will Gottlieb, and I'm filling in today as the host for a special Bull Court Press edition of the CHGO Bulls podcast. Joey, we've got in the production chair behind the scenes, but I am very excited to welcome an old friend, one of my oldest friends in like basketball media coverage, Steph Noh from the Sporting News. Steph, it is great to have you here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Well, yeah, longtime followers will know us from our previous podcast experience. I felt like you replaced me with Mark K, so I'm kind of like the first wife, and he's the second wife. And now that second wife has left, you've
he divorced
crawling back the first wife here.
I do what I can to feel loved, but it is really great to talk with you. I feel like normally we get a good chance to catch up over Summer League, but you were not able to be there at the same time that I was this year. But just for the first time in years now, the Bulls have actually done some stuff. So I wanted to get your thoughts on all of it. We're going to start with Josh Giddy and Alex Caruso trade. We're going to talk about Zach LaVine. I want to get your thoughts there. And then just kind of like what you foresee with this team. But like I said, let's start with the Giddy for Caruso trade. How are you feeling about that now with a couple months to digest the news?
I guess I'm feeling the same way that I felt initially, which is, I mean, if people have listened to my podcast appearances before, basically my issue was I always thought that Giddy was a really interesting prospect, and I kind of wanted the Bulls to get him before there was even this. I guess it kind of came out of nowhere. But my issue was that I liked him because he was a buy low candidate, and the Bulls instead paid a premium to get him, which doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, if you're judging him just based on the quality of player, I think he's a very good candidate to have a much better season this year than last year for a variety of different reasons. First of all, I think that just like mentally, he wasn't really there last year. And he said that in like his exit press last year. So with, a fresh start, I think he's just like the perfect classic candidate of like, get this guy in a new situation and you can get better play out of him. And also like the fit on OKC was just terrible for him. Now that's for a reason. It's because like he was not as good as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams, right? So like if you build an entire team around any player in the league, they're going to look better. Is he worth building an entire team around? I mean, that's like the issue that a lot of, the podcasters and, blog boys like you and me have brought up. But I think that the Bulls are going to do it, and he's going to look really, really good when you just like put him in this perfect situation for him.
Okay, so that was exactly where I wanted to go, which is like, I think first of all, there's 2 major criticisms with this. One is like the contract and what that becomes, and let's put that aside for now because I want to focus on the first part, which is like when you have an opportunity to trade for a guy, or even just like build around a player, whether it's through the draft, in free agency, whatever it may be, like if you want to build around this player, then he has to reach a certain level of quality of play, right? If this guy is going to warrant having the ball in his hands for 30% usage, he needs to be so good at scoring and facilitating and playmaking and passing to justify that amount of usage. I think that's really the question about Giddy. And what makes it even more of a challenge is, okay, is it the worst thing in the world if he's not so good that he's like a superstar 30% usage, like 20, 10, and 10 guy? No, but as long as he can play as kind of a complementary role, then it becomes no problem. He can play off the ball next to Kobe or whoever else the Bulls bring in down the line. But I think that's really the major question. And when you are, like you said, buying high on a player and you're willing to move your most valuable trade asset, is it better to go for a guy that can be a good role player, or take a swing on a guy that might be, a good primary or secondary guy, but sort of the floor is so low because there's a chance that he can't play. He's not good enough to play on the ball. And when he doesn't have the ball, he's just like a complete negative out there. What do you think about that like proposition?
Yeah, I think it's helpful for people to look at the situation with like real examples. Like the reason why you and I might not love this is, just because of these archetypes that we're talking about. But I mean, like, look at a player like Trae Young, right? Like, is Giddy going to be better than Trae Young? I mean, it's a pretty tough ask. And the reason why I bring Trae up is like I live in Atlanta here, so I see a lot of him. And I mean, he's like a brilliant, brilliant passer. He's a good 3-point shooter. But you look at what the Hawks have tried to do. I mean, they have really tried to target the perfect personnel to make him look as good as he can. And they did get to an Eastern Conference Finals. It was a little bit fluky. Aside from that, I mean, Trae has played awesome. He's put up crazy stats, but they've been in the Trae-in game, as I like to call it, like almost every year now. So is that what the Bulls are setting themselves up
Bulls
for?
erasure.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I got to think of a Giddy pun for the playing game, and it can be the Trae-in versus the Giddy, whatever Bulls. But that might be like what this road is leading towards.
Yeah, and so when you think about that, I mean, so one of the other kind of trade packages that came up, or one of the rumored deals that the Bulls passed on, was the Kings trading 13 for Caruso. And obviously Devin Carter was drafted 13th. He's going to be injured, but he's a guy that like fits into that archetype of like, he's going to be a high level role player, right? He's going to be able to shoot. He's going to be able to defend. Maybe he can expand his game a little bit more, but like when you zoom out and just think about like how you would be building a roster, if you were the one, pushing the buttons, would you have preferred to take this kind of swing on the upside, understanding the risk, or would you have gone with, maybe a safer play that doesn't have that same upside just in a vacuum of this offseason? Because I think when you start to look at what possibilities were out there, at the trade deadline last year, that starts to kind of unravel some things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think it's that binary. Like, I would not have really wanted a guy like Devin Carter just because, I mean, he's fine. Like, I think he's a good prospect, but the Bulls just really need to take some shots at top 10 guys. I think that's like why they did this Giddy trade. I mean, out of everybody on the roster, I think that Giddy probably has the best chance of doing that. And like maybe it's a really, really low percentage chance that he gets that top ceiling outcome. I mean, I think it's pretty much zero that he becomes a top 10 guy. But at least like maybe the Bulls could convince themselves there's like a whatever 1% chance. But yeah, I mean, I think the way to do that is they just needed to look further out, and like get a pick in 2025 and a better draft. The problem, of course, is that like there's just so much internal pressure on them. And that's, I mean, you can kind of like see the issues where what's best for the franchise, those interests are not necessarily lining up with what's best for the people making those decisions. And that's not to fault the people making those decisions, because I mean, your natural inclination when you work so hard to get a job in the NBA is you're going to want to try to keep it. And you're going to want to try to, balance those two things and in your mind create justifications that you're doing that. But I mean, the bottom line is like rebuilds that you try to rush in like 1 or 2 years, they just don't really work. Like the Thunder, the reason why their rebuild worked, they weren't bad for that long, but they just got like so many future picks that they could afford to miss on a bunch of players. And the Bulls have not really set themselves up that way. Like they need to hit on most of their decisions going forward, which of course is possible. It's just like you're really kneecapping your chances when you are not allowing yourself to make mistakes in the future.
You've said a couple of times that you like Giddy as a player. You thought of him as a good buy low. I tend to agree, but I'm just curious what you think about like what his role will look like next year. How good does he make some of the other young players around him? What kind of season do you expect out of him next year? And then, looking even beyond that, let's talk about the contract and what that might end up looking like.
I mean, his role is going to be to do whatever the hell he wants. Like, there's not going to be a ton of talent on this team. They're going to trade away. They're going to try to trade away most of their vets. They're going to try to justify this trade, so they're going to give him every single opportunity to succeed. As I said, he's going to have the ball like all the time, which is fine because he's a pretty unselfish player. I think he's going to set up the young guys to score like in spots that they like. One of the issues with Giddy is that he turns the ball over a lot, which isn't going to matter on this team, right? Because like most of the fans are going to be consuming these games just through box scores, watching highlights. They're not going to be watching like 48 minutes, 82 games of, the Bulls losing by 12 points. So if he turns it over, 5 times, then I don't really think that that's going to be a problem, or the Bulls are really going to care that much.
Yeah, I think, it's just interesting to look at this in contrast with DeRozan, who obviously like was so steady, but like the possession battle became such an important part of the Bulls trying to overcome their like massive discrepancy in 3-point attempts. And I do think like turnovers don't really bother me if you're like a young player trying to play fast and trying to like understand what passes work, understand how to get easier offense. Like you have to be a little bit risky with that kind of stuff. And so in that sense, like it kind of reminds you of the Warriors when Steph is just like trying a bunch of crazy shit and like trying to make it work. And sometimes that's going to look great. Sometimes there's going to be turnovers with that. I don't expect Josh Giddey to be the next Steph Curry, but like I'm okay with the turnovers there. I do think that's going to be a problem when they get to a higher level. But as you said, like they're just not trying to play at a higher level. They don't need to be at that point. And I'm curious to get your thoughts more on how good the Bulls team will be next year and beyond that. But one of the other kind of storylines with this, or one of the under-discussed storylines, is how bringing in a new point guard to be ball dominant affects Kobe White. Obviously, Kobe played off of DeMar a bunch last year and really benefited from that. But like, I think a lot of people would argue that, ascending young guard, he needs the ball in his hands. Zach's coming back. Like, how is Billy Donovan going to manage that? How important is it that Kobe, like, or how do you kind of foresee that shaking out? Because as you said, like, Giddy's going to have the ball a ton, but Kobe still needs it. And what do you think it says about the Bulls' kind of perspective on Kobe, who really broke out last year with the ball in his hands a little bit more?
I think they'll be great together. I think they make a lot of sense together because Giddy is like a pretty good transition passer. Kobe is really fast. I mean, his north-south speed. People don't really remember this, but that's why he was drafted so high, is because like he's one of the fastest north-south guys at the college level. We haven't seen it as much in the NBA level. So maybe he can get back to that. The Bulls were actually they were a really slow team last year. So I think that's another reason why they got Giddy, is to try to juice up this transition attack a little bit. And you mentioned that Kobe was better with the ball last year, which I think is true. He got much better in pick and rolls, like getting to the basket, those decision making off of those pick and rolls. Like he was pretty good chemistry with Vooch towards the middle and the end of the year. But he's not a guy where he's going to have like a 30% usage rate. So I think that his biggest strength is catch and shoot 3-point shooting, which Giddy is going to find him like a ton. I mean, so yeah, I think that combination just makes a lot of sense. They can also screen for each other too, because Kobe's he's like 6'5", but he's usually gonna have a smaller guy in him. That's like one of his biggest strengths, is he's like a really tall point guard. So if they can generate some switches, I think that could be really beneficial for Giddy as well.
What do you think Giddy gets paid on this next deal? And do you think there's value in the Bulls trying to get something done before the season starts?
I don't know, like so he's eligible for like the small max. There's like 3 maxes. I don't know what the small max is for him. It's probably like,
I think it's like 25%.
High 20s.
25% of the cap. I'm not sure exactly what the number is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would think that he gets at least like 25 million a year. Maybe like, I know that before he had this like really bad last season, there was like discussion. I don't know if it was from his camp or just like general, media guys or whatever, saying that like he was going to be on like one of these max rookie deals. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore, just because of how bad his last year was. But I still think that, he has a lot of leverage. I think he has all the leverage basically. Yeah, so I think he's probably going to get a really big deal, and the Bulls are not really going to fight him that much on him.
Yeah, they're really just not in a position to do that, having given up such an important asset to get him, and understanding that, like, if you let that asset walk for nothing, it becomes a huge problem. Ton more I want to get into with you, starting with Zach LaVine's future. But first, let's take a quick break. To tell everyone about our pals, Ray Chevrolet. You can shop at Ray Chevrolet and secure the new Chevy and price for you. That's because their new car clearance event is going on all month long, and you can shop their huge selection of new Chevy models now and at new low prices. Visit our partner in August at their location on Route 12 in Fox Lake, or raychevrolet.com. It's one of the top selling Chicago area Chevy dealers. You will always be able to find one of their largest inventories. Right now, you can get 0% financing, 0% payments until 2025. Put $0 down and get 0 hidden fees on all new Chevrolet models. That's a lot of zeros. Or you can cruise into August on your way and shop over 125 of their vehicles priced under $20,000. And if you've heard of Ray Chevrolet, you've also heard of Ray's Price Promise. They're guaranteed to make your next vehicle more affordable than ever with no price changing, no add-ons, and no hidden fees ever. That means incredible prices that we're talking about now are the ones that you can expect to see when you go into the Ray Chevy store or when you check out their website online. So shop the new car clearance event all month long by visiting Ray Chevrolet in Fox Lake or raychevrolet.com. They've been serving the community since 1963. Together, let's drive. Today's show also brought to you by Coors Light. Between work, social media, and the choices life throws our way, it's no wonder we are more worked up than ever. Coors Light celebrates rising above and choosing a chill mindset. Why not turn that rained out barbecue into a karaoke house party, or after a tough loss, settle the score with an ice cold peace offering? Make the choice to choose chill and then reach for a Coors Light. It is mountain cold refreshment. I just mentioned the Circa Sports and Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. And I can recall a time when there was a IV drip of Coors Light directly going into Matt Peck's arms to keep him chill, but also keep that buzz going. So when the mountains turn blue, you know what to do. It is as cold as the Colorado Rockies. It's cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill. Crack open a Coors Light. Crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO-basketball. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. All right, back to it here because I want to get your thoughts on Zach LaVine, who is still a Chicago Bull. Recently, you wrote something kind of dispelling some of the narratives about him that I think, to be fair, were true at some point in his career. I recall a time when you and I were in Vegas writing about how much of a disaster the Jimmy Butler trade was and how paying Zach LaVine $18 million a year was a disaster. But that turned out to be kind of a great contract. And I think it would have been a great time to sell on Zach LaVine. But alas, they kept him and then they gave him a max contract. He is now the 17th highest paid player in the league. What do you think about Zach the player? And what do you think about Zach the contract? And what do you think about like the perception of him and that contract kind of overshadowing some of what he can do on the court?
Well, I think Zach the player is a flawed player, but a very good player. And the key is to maximize his strengths and hide his weaknesses, which I think Billy Donovan did a pretty good job of in, those all-star seasons for Zach. So like his strengths are that, you're just not going to stop him from scoring. He's just such a amazing, tough shot maker. He's like a really good 3-point shooter. His first step is I don't think it gets talked about enough that, he's just so good at getting to the rim and finishing in these weird acrobatic ways when he does get there. Now, his weaknesses are that he is good at those tough shots. So he just settles for them a lot, which, ideally you would just want him taking easier looks. His crunch time offense, he's just not a good decision maker in those situations. I think that he tries to play hero ball a little bit too much. And his help defense, I think it's gotten better certainly, but he can still, get back cut. He can still fall asleep at times. So I think that, that stuff can be hidden though. There's a lot of really good, top 10, top 15 players that have those same weaknesses and they're just on better teams. I think that the Lakers still make a ton of sense for Zach. They can definitely hide all those weaknesses with the personnel that they have. And I think that's probably where he's going to end up towards the trade deadline, because they basically brought back their entire roster from last year, which just is not good enough to compete in, a really, really tough Western Conference. And they have a couple draft picks. So I think they're maybe, just waiting to see if Zach's health is going to be an issue again. I don't think it will be. And I think around the trade deadline, when, his stats get back to his career levels and hopefully, he does stay pretty healthy, then he's going to find a new home here.
So you said a lot there. The number one thing is that you sound like you still are on team. Do not attach picks to Zach whatsoever.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
What's like, do you feel like there is any argument to do it? Like, I think at this point in the offseason, it's like you can't dump him into cap space at this point. So you are going to be taking back bad salary. I feel like if there was a world where you could completely remove his money from the books, maybe it made some sense. But yeah, it just seems like at this point, and I tend to agree, but just kind of like trying to explore what the other options are, that at this point, it just doesn't make sense to be giving up assets when you're entering a phase like a rebuilding phase. I mean, whatever they want to call it.
That'd be super dumb to do that. So I really hope they don't do that. If they just want to trade him for expiring salary, then there are options out there, like I'm sure the Nets would love to get off Ben Simmons. That's like a perfect salary match, so just do like
okay. I was thinking about that one the other day, and I actually think that would not, like, the Nets wouldn't. Why would the Nets want to do that? They would take 3 years of Zach for an expiring contract. I think the one reason
because it's
you
Ben
could look
Simmons,
at is
Will. It's Ben Simmons on the other end. That's the answer. And
but you're
also
done with
because
them after this year. I
they
think they
are
could try to rehab his value and let him put up some points and then try to flip him again. Is that kind of the idea?
I mean, I think the Nets are kind of delusional about where they're at too. Like they were so reluctant to trade Mikal Bridges because they think they have a better team than they actually do. So I mean, maybe they think that if they get Zach, they can do a really, really quick pivot, which maybe they can. They're in a better situation than the Bulls, like from a rebuilding standpoint. They have more picks. And yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that would work for them.
It sounds like you also think that there's a chance the Bulls could get something back for Zach, not just have to like take on bad salary or
I don't think they can get anything like great back for him. No. I mean, maybe
so,
like if he plays really well throughout the year, like if he really rehabs his value by February, but I think that they're just going to wait until the point where somebody offers them some sort of like break even trade and then just like hop at that first offer. Because we've seen this. I mean, I brought this up before. We've seen that like when AK gets an idea, he's taking the very first offer that satisfies all those needs. He's not going to like wait and try to negotiate and try to like bargain up. Like as soon as some team offers him just whatever that doesn't include picks, he's going to like, send it to the commissioner's office within 5 minutes.
so what do you think that should look like? I mean, clearly getting off of bad money is going to be a priority. No draft picks are probably going to be coming back. Like, is it just breaking it into 2 smaller contracts that you can move? Like, what do you think that they should be looking for in a Zach trade if they're able to pull one off?
What they should be looking for, I don't know. I'll answer like what I think they will be looking for instead, which is I think they're going to try to get young players who have not been very good. So like examples are what they've already done, like a guy like Chris Duarte, maybe like a little bit better prospect than Duarte, but even like Giddy too. Like they're getting guys who have shown a little bit of promise, but have like pretty low value around the league. And just hoping that like some of these reclamation projects hit. Jalen Smith, you could put in that camp a little bit too, although like he had a pretty good year last year, but at the same time, like he was, what was he, like number 9 pick or something? And like he certainly has not lived up to those expectations. So like there's some potential there, right? Like for him to be even better than he was last year. They're just trying to get like all of these darts that they're throwing, right? And just like hoping that a couple of them hit. So that's what they're going to try to do with Zach. Like maybe like I don't think like it's going to be like James Wiseman, but that type of player, right? Where like he has a good draft pedigree, like he hasn't been very good. So maybe they can justify to the ownership and fan base that like this guy is actually
Young player,
like,
new opportunity. We can get.
yeah, we should get excited about this guy who might actually be better in a new situation.
Do you feel like that can happen by the trade deadline or before? Because I have this like fear that this contract is just so toxic to teams that, I mean, there's not going to be a lot of cap space teams next year. So there's really not even going to be a ton of opportunity to offload him into someone's space for free next year. Like, do you think there's a world where they get stuck with him for like this year and next? Or do you think that at some point in this season, they'll be able to move off of him?
I mean, I think it's a possibility, but I think that he will get moved for a couple different reasons. I mean, first of all, we are in an age of parity. So every team can talk themselves in that they are Zach LaVine away from being a true contender, which really, really helps the Bulls like a lot. And also, like, I don't think there's going to be a ton of great players on the trade market this year. I think James Harden might get moved because I think the Clippers are going to be a lot worse than they probably think. But aside from him, I don't really know a ton of other guys. Maybe like Ingram. Ingram might get moved. That might even be like, somewhat soon. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't think there's going to be a ton of candidates. So Zach might be like a top 5 name that's available.
Let's switch gears here to the DeRozan deal. Obviously, like they because they took on Jalen Smith's contract, they didn't have enough space to be the team that took on the bad money to get the good pick. So they leave this trade without the first round pick swap that goes to San Antonio. But they get back 2 seconds and they obviously get DeRozan to his preferred destination. What did you think about that whole process? I mean, to me, it was a little bit like surprising that DeRozan was able to like do the same thing that he did a couple of years ago, which was like, okay, there's no suitors out there that are going to give you more than like the taxpayer mid-level exception. All of a sudden, you get like a $25 million a year deal from the Kings, and there's like all this money and picks going around. Were you kind of surprised by the way that played out? And what do you think about the Bulls being the team that did not get the good asset?
So I think there's a couple of things to take away from the situation. One is that, some team, I think that we kind of underestimated again the value of DeRozan, that some team was just going to figure out a way to get it done because he's that good of a player. This was not like a clean way for the Kings to get him. They had to like really, really push a lot of buttons and be creative, but they were just like, hey, this guy's good. We're going to make it happen. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you mentioned that the Bulls did not get the pick swap, which is going to be like potentially extremely valuable. And the reason why they did that is just a lack of foresight. So I think that goes back to their order of priorities just at the very, very start of the offseason, where, it's been reported that there's like some conflict between Zach and management and Zach and Billy. So they just really, really wanted to get off Zach. It seems like that was their number one focus, is like, we have to find a Zach LaVine trade. And they said like, oh, the DeMar stuff, that's going to be number 2 once we get off Zach. And they spent all this time doing it and nothing came out of it. And then by the time, they realized that, hey, we're stuck with Zach, like now they kind of screwed themselves out of this DeMar situation because they didn't plan it out. They did not leave themselves, like you said, the cap space to be able to absorb bad contracts. So they made like a sign and trade really, really difficult to pull off. Which is why they had basically no leverage and they could not ask for a lot of stuff back. So yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying with AK, where like he just has this like very rigid plan, and that's really not like a good way to attack problems in general, because things are always going to change. So you have to be flexible in your approach and be able to adapt to circumstances, which I mean, like they just don't really do very well.
What do you think about DeMar's landing spot with the Kings? Like, how do you think he changes their fortunes?
I mean, the West is so tough. Like I did a power rankings thing, and I had the Kings out of the play-in prior to trading for DeMar. And after trading for him, I had them up a couple spots, but that's still like they're in play-in range, right? Yeah. So I mean, the fit is not clean because he's not a shooter. Sabonis is not a shooter. I think people are underselling that De'Aaron Fox actually like improved his 3-point shooting quite a bit last year. Also his defense quite a bit. So that helps the fit certainly. But I think DeMar's like just so smart that he's going to figure out a way to make it work. And I know like that has been the logic for a lot of bad Bulls teams, like the 3 alphas, these guys are just ballers. They're going to make it work. But I think this is like a little bit different just because like he has succeeded in really weird fits previously. I mean, he's never really had like a A+ fit for him. And this is just like kind of the same, I think Sabonis is like a better center for him than Vucevic. So he's like already kind of like mentally mapped out ways where he can maximize those types of teammates. And I think he's going to do it again in Sacramento.
I also feel like the Kings they rely so much on variance, right? Like their offense is so fast. They shoot so many threes. They require like things to just go right offensively. And DeRozan is so steady in like the complete opposite way that I think it will help raise their floor. And like you said, in a Western Conference where it's like 10, 11, 12 teams could all feasibly make the top 6, I think he really helps them, and puts them in a better position to do that. Let's talk about the Bulls in general and what you kind of think they're building. You've alluded to it a couple of times here that like maybe the process has been a little bit too, nearsighted and not quite focused enough on the bigger picture. What do you think of just like the way, I mean, very much trying to like thread this needle of being young and being exciting and being new and fresh, but also not getting guys that are like true swings at, potential home runs. What do you think about like the way that the Bulls have gone about this change? And were you surprised that they even actually went for it, considering, at the postseason press conference, it seemed very unlikely that there was going to be a rebuild, that DeRozan was not going to be back. And then all of a sudden Caruso gets traded and DeRozan moves on and they're in this new era, but they have kind of, in some ways, I think, set themselves up to top out back where they just were.
Well, I think the one way they avoid that fate that you're talking about is that they're semi-bad this year. They get a great pick in this 2025 draft. And, it's not just Cooper Flagg. There's a lot of really good players in this draft. So that's the path that really saves them, is Josh Giddey becomes like a top 30 guy. They get a top 5 pick in this draft. And then actually, like, they're looking pretty good at that point. If that stuff doesn't happen, like if just one of those two things doesn't happen, then yeah, it's getting pretty iffy. And I definitely understand, like I said before, why they're doing what they're doing. It's because like they're feeling this pressure and they don't want to lose their jobs. But yeah, I mean, like the Bulls rushed their last rebuild, right? Like that's why they got to this point. And also just like the fact that, they didn't get surplus picks in that Jimmy Butler trade. Like I said, with the Thunder, like that's how the Thunder are the Thunder. That's how the Celtics are the Celtics, is they get all these picks from the Nets. That's how they got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, is those picks from the Nets. So that's what you ideally need in order to make like a super rebuild. Yeah, but I don't want to be like a total downer and say like this Bulls plan can't work, because it can. They just need, those two things to happen: the top 5 pick and Giddy to be like top 30 guy.
Yeah, the way I describe it is like if there's like 100 doors that you could go through, and those are like your probabilities before this season or like at the trade deadline when they didn't trade anybody, it was like basically they had to win the lottery this year and next year to like give themselves a chance. And now, and I mean, that's like 2 possible doors out of 100 that are open for them. Now they've maybe opened that to like 25 or 30 possible scenarios where out of 100 that they like get out of this sort of lower middle class cycle that they've been stuck in for the last however many years. So I do think that they have given themselves more of a shot, but to your point, I think it's going to require still a lot of luck. And there were other possibilities out there where they could have opened even more doors for themselves. And I think that's kind of the concerning part. But yeah, I don't know that was really ever going to be on the table for a front office that's like their job security is, something that they're considering. Their, contracts are going to be up after next year, I want to say. So yeah, I think that's always kind of a consideration with this that a lot of casual fans don't think about, is like, when are these kind of bigger swing moves going to happen? And a lot of it kind of lines up with job security. Do you feel like how long do you think, I guess you kind of answered it, but like, do you feel like if the Bulls kind of get to a point where Giddy is playing at a top 30-ish level and they get into the top 5, maybe it's the 5th pick, like, what do you think the time frame for them to break out of this like play-in cycle that they're in? How long do you think that would take?
That really depends so much on like who they get with that pick, because a guy like Cooper Flagg, I think, is probably ready to contribute pretty quickly. I haven't really looked too much at the other guys in that class, but it's probably going to be one and dones that are going to take a couple years. Yeah, but like Io's going to still be around, Kobe's going to be around, Patrick Williams is going to be he's on a long-term deal, so I don't think they're going to be terrible through those next couple of years. But yeah, if everything goes to plan, if they get Cooper Flagg and Josh Giddey becomes like a great player, yeah, maybe like year 3 of Cooper Flagg, they can be like pretty good.
Yeah,
like
I think so much of that.
Team.
Yeah, so much of it depends, though, to me, on like actually keeping the pick this year. And A lot of the lines are looking in like the 27.5 to 28.5 range for win total. ESPN just did a projection today that had the Bulls being the 10th seed with 30
interesting.
wins and 52 losses, which
That's
I
the
found that
10
to be pretty
seed?
interesting. Yeah. Which just
Oh my
like
gosh.
ban the play-in, get rid of it, mix the conferences, whatever you have to do to make sure that a 30-win team does not get into the play-in.
That's pretty bad, yeah.
But I was listening to our pals Fred and Doug Tonis the other day on their show, and one thing that Doug was saying was that like it doesn't like obviously you want to keep the pick this year, but if they don't keep the pick this year, it's not the end of the world because then they're just going to have to give up their pick next year. And to me, it's like because of the way that Kobe and Ayo's contracts specifically are structured, they're going to have to get paid in 2 years' time. Like, do you feel like the urgency to one, do you feel like the Bulls are going to keep their pick? And two, how urgent should they be about like maximizing the value of their own draft pick this year?
I did think that they were going to keep the pick, but when you told me that like 30 wins is the 10 seed, I mean, I don't know. Like, I haven't gone out and projected every single team this year. So
I'll read them
maybe
off to you. So the play-in group, I'll start with 7, 46 and 36 for the Pacers, 45 and 37 for the Heat, 31 and 51 for the 9th seed Atlanta Hawks, 30 and 52 for the Bulls. And then the bottom 5, Raptors 26 and 56, Hornets 21 and 61, Nets 22 and 60, Pistons 20 and 62, Wizards 17 and 65. I feel like the Raptors and the Hornets probably
the Hornets are going to be better,
better
than
than
that.
that.
That's not
I
a
think
good
the Hornets are
projection
going to
for
be
the
kind of
Hornets.
good.
The Raptors, I think they're going to be bad. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not as confident in that, but I think the Hornets are going to be better.
Yeah, they won 43 games with LaMelo, but
Yeah.
when he last played a full season, and obviously Brandon Miller, second year, could definitely take the leap. But like, do you feel like, to me, if the Bulls give up the 11th pick to the Spurs this next year, that would be like a complete disaster. Do you feel that there is that much of an importance on keeping the pick this year? Or do you feel like because then they will probably just convey it next year, it doesn't matter quite as much this season?
Oh, I think it would be a disaster. Yeah. I mean, like, I think I've heard the 2026 draft is also like good, but not as good as the 2025 draft. Yeah. And you can get like a really good player with a top 10 protected pick. Like, look at what the Mavs did. They just like totally tanked 2 years ago, and they were in the play-in range. Like, they were in a very, very similar situation to the Bulls, right? But the Mavs decided to go the other way. They barely held on to that pick. They actually traded down from that pick and got Derek Lively. I think they got him 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Took out some
So
money in like the Rashawn Holmes deal.
yeah, that like totally changed the fate of their franchise. I mean, like, he's really, really good. He's going to start for them over Gafford this year. So I think that there's going to be a similar Lively type player this year at 10. Even if the Bulls like just barely skate by and keep that pick, like, it's still going to be valuable. And also just like the time factor, like having the pick a year earlier is more valuable than like giving up the same pick.
And spending
Giving up the
another
pick
year
and
kind of like,
getting the pick the next year. Yeah, there's
yeah.
like an opportunity cost there.
Speaking of 10th or 11th pick, what did you think about Miles Buzelis in Summer League?
Yeah, I mean, like, I saw a lot of the same stuff that I saw in the G League, which is that he has great defensive instincts, which I'm just like drawn to immediately. You know, he said that he studied Andre Kirilenko. You can see that. Like, you can see that he times the ball really well, even though he doesn't have a good wingspan. I think it's like a neutral wingspan. He's still really good at just like not getting the ball at the high point necessarily, but like getting at the midpoint or seeing where the low point is. Same thing as Alex Caruso.
Yeah,
Alex
he was
Caruso
so good at the low point of the ball.
He's great at getting deflections, even though like he's the smallest guy out there. And that's something that I don't really think you can teach. Like, you just have to have really good hand-eye coordination. So that's great. You know, I said previously that I wasn't super worried about his three-point shooting, and then he shot like 21% in Summer League,
And
which is like
even like if you just remove the Warriors game where he was like 4 for 8, like it's even worse. I mean, besides for that game, it was rough.
Yeah, basically the same as it's worse than he shot in the G League. I think in the G League he shot like 26 or 27%. So now I like am kind of worried. Now I think that like, okay, maybe it's going to be a couple years before this guy even gets to average. Like, I don't think he's going to shoot a great percentage as a rookie. And then the other thing I saw in his G League tape, which I kind of saw a little bit in Summer League too, is just like his finishing isn't there yet. He's just like too weak. So he just like gets stonewalled by guys. But the fact that like he has some shake, he has pretty good ball handling and some
Yeah, his
nice.
handling was
He just has
impressive.
a good bag, you know. Like you can tell that he just watches these guys with bag and like tries to copy their moves.
Do you feel like he's the kind of guy that, like, to me in the G League and then in Summer League, where he was clearly the best player on the team and the offense was running through him, it required him to like just create so much. And I don't think he was really necessarily ready to do that. Do you feel like when he gets to the NBA level, just not having to be the number one guy will help him? Or do you feel like it'll be sort of a giddy situation where if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, it's going to be a struggle because that 3-point shot is still such a work in progress?
I don't think it's going to matter to him if he's not the number one guy. He's going to be the number one guy in his head. Like he's going to just like try to score every single time he has the ball. It's going to be like very Michael Porter Jr.-esque, where I think he has better court vision than MPJ. So like if he sees a cool pass, he's going to make it. But he's going to look for his shot first and foremost, and he's not going to give the ball up just to like give it up like Patrick Williams does, you know?
Okay, you just mentioned Patrick Williams, so I got to ask about his contract and what you think about him coming back for 5 years. Was that a good gamble to make, considering the health risks, considering the fact that he's played like one actually good game in the first 4 years of his career? Or are you still buying into the tools, which are, I mean, I can't deny him either. So where are you at with Patrick and the contract they gave him?
It was game 82, right? It was like against
Game
the Wolves or
82 against the
something.
Minnesota Timberwolves. The day we'll never forget.
Every time I think about Patrick Williams now, I just think about you asking him about how many chicken parms he's going to eat that day. Over under 2. You can place it at Circus Sports, right?
I think it was definitely going to be the over. The over is going to get you the best odds on that one.
Yeah, but you know, like no surprise. I think like all of your guests and yourself and like pretty much all of Bulls, whatever Twitter media is like, you know, what is it, 20 million a year or something? Like that's not going to be that
18.
much. Yeah, 18. That's is it just flat? It's 18 flat.
Yep.
I mean, whatever it is,
Player
like it's
option
just,
on the 5th year.
yeah, I mean, like the league is getting this massive TV deal. It's going to be they cap the spikes at 10%. It's like 10% max every year, and it's going to hit that probably. So just like the deflationary nature of that contract is going to be like totally fine.
Okay, last thing before we kind of move on for this is you wrote a story about how the Bulls broke up with their diehard fans years ago after the season. There were some really incredible lines in there. I don't know if you would be mortified if I read them on the podcast in front of you, but they were just such good ones that I do kind of want to read some of them. Diehard Bulls fans are the jilted lovers that can't get over a bad breakup.
That's me.
Yep. Where are we here? This is bad podcasting. But anyway, it was just like, you know, the Applebee's of the NBA. That was another great line. Where are you at with the Bulls this year and just like the way you've been following them? Obviously, so you covered them so closely for so many years with The Athletic and your Substack and things like that. But now with Sporting News, you've kind of removed yourself a little bit and maybe even more than that to cover the rest of the league where there is actual good basketball being played, where there are teams that are employing good process to eventually get themselves into a winning situation. Given that you wrote this, I think before the offseason and what we've talked about before, just like where are you at with the Bulls and the way that you want to watch them from now on?
I feel pretty conflicted because I know some people that work for the Bulls, not like the top guys. I don't know Arturis at all. But like their social media people are amazing. You know, the people that work for the organization are just so passionate and do such a good job. But at the same time, like some of the lead decision makers, some of them are good. Some of them are really, really sharp. Shout out Steve Weinman. But some of them are just like not serious. They're just not serious decision makers. And I am just like sick of investing time into breaking down these decisions that are just obviously like made haphazardly. Like you don't need to be an NBA analyst or be watching like all 82 Bulls games in order to like see that some of these decisions just make zero sense. So, you know, like as I get older, I just turned 40 like last week. And, you know, I have kids now. I just don't have time to invest in something that's not going to invest back in me. That's like a lesson you learn when you get grumpy and old man shaking fist at cloud. So I'm just not going to do it with the Bulls, you know, like I'm still going to root for them. or not necessarily root for them, but I'm still going to be happy when they have success and like hope that the fans get, a good basketball product. But I'm not going to be like living and breathing with the Bulls anymore. It's just like I don't think it's worth anyone's time, to be like totally honest.
Yeah, it is just kind of a sad situation and something that like I think the closer you are into it, the more you kind of realize what all of the just like politics that go on behind the scenes of reasons why they aren't doing that stuff. And I think they like I do appreciate the fact that they went into a different direction this year. I don't know if that's like lowering the bar so much that like even just making a trade for the first time in 3 years is like some big celebration. But I do think that like getting younger is a good thing. They have, as I said, opened up new avenues for themselves to possibly be good again. I don't think it was like the perfect rebuild. But I do think that they are in a better situation. I just wonder, how long is it going to go on like this? Because to me, like I said, I think there's a chance that they could get good at some point soon. I think it's going to take some luck. It always does. But yeah, I can see why it would be hard. And we went through a similar situation with Marquet, who, decided that he wanted to focus on his family and his life and not on,
He's washed too, just like me.
staying up and catching these games that aren't investing back into him. So I thought that was a great story. I thought the Applebee's line was a great one. And it's interesting to hear, because one of the things that I think like the argument from, not saying this is from anyone in particular, but like from these organizations is like, we have to cater to the casual fan. The casual fan is the one that we have to sell to because they're the ones that are going to come fill up the stadium. The diehard fans are going to be there regardless. And so it's interesting to see some of these people who really have lived and died with this team start to pull away from them. And yeah, I don't think that you are the first, and I don't think you'll be the last that does start to feel this way. But I'm glad to, at least have a chance to talk with you a little bit more about them because at the very least, it was still interesting, and it's a part of the rest of the league that you do cover. So
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I gave them 26 years here of like undying support, but at some point, like, you just gotta move on. And yeah, I'll be very, very happy though, like if they ever do get their act together.
Before we wrap up here and I send you on your way, Steph, wanted to see if you thought that there were any other interesting storylines about the Bulls. And then also just curious about like storylines around the league now and how much time you've kind of invested in covering some of these other teams. What do you think is kind of like some of the interesting storylines heading into the start of training camps next month?
Interesting stories about the Bulls. I mean, I think that there is this there's a conflict between like what Billy Donovan is going to do. So that will be really interesting to keep an eye on because, he did not want to stay in Oklahoma City for a rebuild. Doesn't seem like there's any heat on him to get fired, but like, is he going to want to see a bad Bulls team through? I think that he might just be kind of seeing if they're better than expected, like right out of the gate. But if they are, a bottom 10 team, I don't really know what's going to happen with Billy. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. Again, not that he's going to get fired, just like he's not going to want to go through this because I do think there will be a ton of interest in him. I do think that like his reputation throughout the league is probably better than what Bulls fans think of him. So he could get like any job he wanted, basically.
Yeah, you tend to think that Billy has been obviously underappreciated, but also kind of underrated, right, as a head coach?
Depends on like who's rating him, I suppose. Like I think that he is a solid, 10 to 20s coach. Yeah, I think a lot of people think he's like bottom 10, which I think is like crazy. Like he's definitely not bottom 10. But it's really hard to find like I mean the 10 greatest coaches in the world, you're probably not going to get. So if you can get number 11, like that's pretty good. That's like definitely good enough to win a championship with, is if you have like the 11th, 12th, 13th best coach in the world, as long as you I mean, like at the end of the day, personnel is like the main driver of these championships. Yeah, so there's that. And as far as like league wide things that I'm looking at, like at the beginning of the year,
Yeah, just or kind of any, obviously there weren't a ton of people changing teams or big trades happening this summer, but any teams you're excited about any teams that you think will take a big jump next year? Like, what's kind of your general forecast for the 2024-25 season?
I mean, I'm really excited to watch Wemby. I think it's like basically impossible to overrate him. I was saying like a month into the season last year that this guy is the best defender in the league, and people thought I was like totally insane. And then it turned out to like be true.
He's going to
So
win like 14 straight Defensive Player of
I
the
think he's
Year.
probably going to be Defensive Player of the Year. I think that he is going to be one of the top 10 guys in the league next year, which I don't know. I think that might be kind of a hot take. I don't know how good the Spurs are going to be, but I mean, you look at like what Chris Paul did with guys like Bismack Biyombo, just making him look like a really good center, and it's like, oh my god, what is this guy going to do to Wemby? Like he's just going to set him up for such amazing passes. When you contrast like Jeremy Sohan versus Chris Paul, I mean, like come on, like he's just going
Even
to.
Trey Jones, he was, I don't know exact number, but like the stat that's been floated around is like the Spurs were +4 or something with Trey Jones and Wemby on the court. So just having any sort of competent point guard play is going to set him up so well. And then you add in a bunch more talent and more space around him to be able to make decisions and just do what he
Yeah,
does. I think they're going to be super
I
interesting.
think maybe fans are sick of hearing about Wemby already, though. But I mean, he's like super fun to watch. Other things that I'm interested in for the season, the Sixers are really interesting. Like, I don't really have a great feel on what they're going to be like, just because they turned over their entire roster aside from like 3 guys. So that's just going to be like a very interesting case where a lot of old head NBA guys say, continuity, continuity, continuity. Whereas Daryl Morey has always just been like, get the talent and they figure it out. So that's going to be a pretty cool test case of which side is right in that debate, which happens all the time. And I don't know who's going to win that one.
Do you think, just going back to Spurs for a second, do you think they'll make the play-in, or do you think they'll be still not quite ready yet? I mean, they won like 21 games last year, so to make that jump in the West, even if they do get a lot better, it's just the West is so ridiculously good.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question because, man, there's some really good teams that are going to be in the play-in. Like, I think the Lakers and Warriors are both going to be in that play-in range again. And they, I don't know if the Warriors got better or not. The Lakers, I said they stayed the same. It wouldn't surprise me. It certainly wouldn't surprise me if the Spurs were in the play-in. I'll put it that way.
What about the Clippers? Are you on, or I guess let's frame it this way. The Clippers and the Nuggets, I think, are two of the teams that have maybe gotten the worst reviews on their offseason. Which one of those teams do you think falls the most? I think maybe kind of an obvious one, but just like, I guess, how far do you think the Clippers fall? Like
I
the
don't know if
Nuggets
it's
are
an
just
obvious
so good
one.
that they'll.
I
I
really
mean,
don't know if
Jokic.
it's an obvious one because I think the Nuggets are going to fall off quite a bit too. Like, I think that Jamal Murray just does not look the same for whatever reason. I think KCP, he's fine. He's probably like the 15th best player at his position, but Christian Brown instantly becomes like the worst starter at his position. Like the drop off is just so huge there. And then if they play Westbrook a lot, I really don't know what's going to happen because like that's not a great fit for them. So I do expect the Nuggets to drop off like quite a bit.
Going back to the East for a second, one of the things that we were talking about on yesterday's show was the Bucks and where they finished. This ESPN projection had them as the 5th seed behind the Cavs, Sixers, Knicks, and Celtics, which
Was
I
this
thought that was
Pelton?
like, was this Pelton?
It's just like
ESPN
a numbers
staff.
thing.
So I guess it was like a bunch of the ESPN reporters. It
Okay.
must have been having to do with Pelton's projections, though, I would imagine. But yeah, I found that to be a little strange. Like the Bucks are just such a regular season wins machine. They certainly have like room for,
They got better too.
potential decline, but I think they got a lot better. I really like Gary Trent.
Yeah.
I just think like with a full year of the same head coach and not having a massive bombshell trade happen the night before the training camp starts, that I think to me is a little maybe disrespectful to the Bucks.
Yeah, and Giannis is just coming off a summer where he was the number 1 scorer by far in the Olympics. He also shot like a career high field goal percentage last year. So I think he's still like a top 3 guy. I mean, I think he probably is not getting enough respect like for MVP odds either. Yeah, I definitely disagree with that. Like, and I, as you know, Will, like I've been kind of like a low key secret Bucks hater. Like I've always thought that they are really, really overrated. And I've been like kind of right on that ever since the championship. Like I thought the championship year they were going to be good. And then every other year they just have these glaring holes. But I actually think they're like underrated now. Like I think they addressed a lot of their holes. You didn't even mention like DeLon Wright, who's like a super solid backup point guard, who's a good defender, which is like their biggest weakness last year. And I'm missing some other pickups, some other minimum pickups.
Taurean Prince.
Taurean Prince, yeah.
Guy. He's solid.
Fine.
Yeah, I think the big thing for them is just like, is Chris Middleton going to play again? Like,
yeah,
two
huge
ankle
sure.
surgeries that's a rough one.
Yeah.
All right, Steph, we can wrap it up there. This was great. I always love picking your brain and talking Bulls with you, even though you were the jilted lover. So always great to have you on. But tell our listeners where they can find you on Twitter and anything you're working on these days that they should be on the lookout for.
Yeah, keeping it low key on Twitter these days in the off season. I'm sick of Elon making money off of me for free. But yeah, during the season, you know, I always have these like short 1-minute videos that I try to put out on various different platforms. So it doesn't matter like what platform you're on. You'll probably see it on Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, whatever. Yeah, but not doing too much during the offseason, aside from my top 100 defenders project, which is going to come out, I don't know, maybe like in a month or two. Yep, that's about it.
And just did the Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast with Stacey King and Mark Janowski. So you guys can go listen to that one if you want more Bulls content. But Steph, always the best talking with you and just some of the best analysis and coverage of the Bulls in the league out there. So if you are somehow not following him already, at Steph Noh on Twitter, I am at Will_Gottlieb. Joey at Joey Spathis, thank you for pushing the buttons behind the scenes for us. We are off on Friday, so we will talk to you guys again next week. Matt and Dave will be back, and so we will speak to you guys all then.
We all silly.